Right now, as you're watching this video, you think you're seeing reality. But what if I told you that everything you perceive, your thoughts, your emotions, even this very moment, is nothing more than an elaborate trick? Ancient sages discovered something so profound about the nature of existence that it's been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. They called it Maya, and once you understand what it really means, you'll never see your life the same way again. For over 3 millennia, the concept of Maya has been whispered about in ashrams, debated in universities, and completely misunderstood by almost everyone who encounters it. Most people think it simply means illusion, but that's like saying the ocean is just water. Today, we're going to dive deep into the rabbit hole of Maya, not just what it is, but how it's actively shaping every single moment of your existence right now. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why the greatest minds in history considered this knowledge both liberating and terrifying. Let me start with a story that happened in ancient India around 500 BCE. There was a wealthy merchant named Sudama who lived in what is now Varanasi. Every morning, he would wake up in his luxurious home, surrounded by silk curtains and golden ornaments, believing himself to be the luckiest man alive. His servants would bring him the finest foods, his family respected him, and his business thrived beyond imagination. But here's where it gets interesting. One day, a wandering sage approached Sudama and said something that shattered his entire worldview. "My friend, you are dreaming, and in your dream, you believe you are awake." Sudama laughed at first. How could this be a dream? He could feel the cool marble beneath his feet, smell the jasmine in his garden, taste the sweetness of the mangoes his servants brought him. The sage smiled and asked him a simple question. "When you dream at night, do you not also feel, smell, and taste in your dreams? Do you not believe, while dreaming, that the dream is completely real?" Sudama's laughter died in his throat, because he realized something profound. In his dreams, he never questioned their reality until he woke up. This story captures the essence of Maya, but not in the way most people understand it. Maya isn't just about illusion. It's about the fundamental nature of perception itself. The word Maya comes from the Sanskrit root ma, which means to measure or to construct. It's not that the world is fake. It's that your experience of the world is constructed by your consciousness in ways you've never imagined. Think about this for a moment. Right now, you're convinced that you're seeing colors. But science tells us something remarkable. Color doesn't exist in the external world. What exists are electromagnetic waves of different frequencies. Your brain takes these waves and creates the experience of red or blue or green. The redness of red exists only in your consciousness. Without consciousness, there would be no color anywhere in the universe, just waves moving through space. But Maya goes much deeper than sensory perception. It's about the entire framework through which you experience reality. And to understand this, we need to travel back to the origins of this concept in ancient India. Around 1500 BCE, in the Vedic period of ancient India, rishis, the seers and sages of that time, were conducting what might be the most sophisticated investigation of consciousness ever undertaken. These weren't philosophers sitting in armchairs debating abstract concepts. They were like scientists, but instead of studying the external world, they were studying the nature of awareness itself. Through techniques of meditation that took decades to master, they began to notice something extraordinary. They discovered that what we call normal waking consciousness is actually just one state among many possible states of awareness. And in these other states, the boundaries that seemed so solid and real in ordinary consciousness began to dissolve. Imagine you're watching a movie in a theater. While you're absorbed in the film, you forget about the screen. You see the hero, the villain, the landscape, the drama unfolding. But what's actually happening? Light is being projected onto a white screen, and your brain is constructing the experience of seeing separate objects and people. The screen is always there, unchanged, but it appears to become the mountains, the faces, the entire world of the movie. The Vedic rishis discovered that consciousness works in a similar way. There's a pure awareness, like the movie screen, that remains constant and unchanging. But this awareness appears to become all the different experiences, thoughts, emotions, and perceptions that make up your daily life. They called this pure awareness Brahman, and they called the apparent transformation of this awareness into the world of experience Maya. But here's where it gets mind-bending. Just as the screen is never actually affected by the movie, it doesn't get hurt when the hero is injured. It doesn't get wet when it shows an ocean. This pure awareness is never actually changed by any experience. The joy, the sorrow, the fear, the excitement that you feel so intensely are like movies playing on the screen of consciousness. Now you might be thinking, this sounds like philosophical speculation. How could ancient people possibly know this? That's exactly what British scholars thought when they first encountered these ideas in the 18th and 19th centuries. They dismissed them as primitive mysticism. But then something remarkable happened. In the 20th century, quantum physics began to reveal something that shook the scientific community to its core. The act of observation seemed to be fundamental to the nature of reality itself. The famous double-slit experiment showed that particles behave differently when they're being observed versus when they're not. Werner Heisenberg, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, said, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." Suddenly, these ancient insights about the role of consciousness in shaping reality didn't seem so primitive anymore. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Eugene Wigner proposed that consciousness might be fundamental to the collapse of quantum wave functions. Physicist John Wheeler suggested that we live in a participatory universe, where consciousness and reality are inseparably linked. But let's bring this down to your everyday experience. How is Maya operating in your life right now? Every morning when you wake up, you immediately slip into what we might call the Maya trance. You look in the mirror and think, "This is me." You see your reflection and assume that's who you are. But think about this. You've been looking at that face in the mirror for years, maybe decades. Has it ever occurred to you to ask, who is looking at the face in the mirror? You assume the face is you, but you're looking at it. You assume your thoughts are you, but you're aware of them. You assume your emotions are you, but you experience them. There's an awareness that's aware of all these things, but somehow you've convinced yourself that you are the things you're aware of, rather than the awareness itself. This is Maya in action. It's not that your body and thoughts and emotions are fake. They're real experiences. But Maya is the process by which you mistake these temporary, changing experiences for your permanent, unchanging identity. Let me give you a concrete example. Think about a time when you were completely absorbed in something, maybe playing a video game, reading a book, or having an intense conversation. In those moments, where was your sense of self? If you're honest, you'll notice that your usual self-consciousness completely disappeared. There was just pure awareness engaged with the activity. But then, the moment you stepped back and started thinking about the experience, the sense of being a separate self returned. I was playing that game. I was reading that book. I was having that conversation. The I that claims these experiences wasn't there during the experiences themselves. It only appeared afterward, in memory and reflection. Maya is the mechanism by which this sense of being a separate self is constantly being created and recreated moment by moment. It's like a movie that's so convincing you forget you're watching a movie. And this has profound implications for how you experience everything in your life, your relationships, your career, your hopes and fears, your entire sense of meaning and purpose. Consider your relationships. When you love someone, what are you actually loving? You might say you love their personality, their kindness, their sense of humor, their physical appearance. But all of these are qualities that appear in your awareness. The love itself is a movement of consciousness. The person you love is, in a very real sense, a construction of your own awareness, built from memories, perceptions, and projections. This doesn't make love less real or meaningful. If anything, it makes it more mysterious and wonderful. It reveals that love is actually the recognition of yourself in another form. When the boundaries created by Maya become transparent, you realize that the consciousness looking out through your eyes is the same consciousness looking out through their eyes. But Maya doesn't just operate in the realm of the personal. It shapes entire civilizations, cultures, and historical epochs. Let me tell you about how this played out during one of the most fascinating periods in Indian history. Around 800 CE, there lived a philosopher named Adi Shankara, who would revolutionize how people understood Maya. Born in Kerala, in southern India, Shankara was a child prodigy who mastered the Vedas by age 8. But his real genius wasn't in memorizing ancient texts. It was in his ability to see through the layers of Maya that had accumulated over centuries of philosophical debate. During Shankara's time, Indian philosophy had become incredibly complex, with hundreds of different schools arguing about the nature of reality. Some said the world was real. Others said it was unreal. Some said consciousness was fundamental. Others said matter was primary. The debates were endless and increasingly abstract. Shankara cut through all of this with a radical insight. He said that the very question, is the world real or unreal, was based on a misunderstanding. The world is neither real nor unreal in the way we usually think about these terms. It's what he called mithya, apparent, dependent, relative reality. To explain this, he used a famous analogy. Imagine you're walking down a dimly lit path at dusk, and you see what appears to be a snake lying across the path. Your heart starts racing. You feel afraid. You might even turn around and run. The snake seems completely real to you. You can see its coils. You might imagine you can see its eyes gleaming in the darkness. But then someone shines a flashlight on the snake, and you realize it's actually just a rope. The snake was never there, but your experience of fear was completely real. The rope was always there, but you didn't see it clearly because of the dim light. Shankara said that Maya works in exactly this way. The rope represents Brahman, pure, unchanging awareness. The snake represents the world of separate objects, people, and experiences that we perceive. The dim light represents our ordinary, untrained consciousness. The world isn't false in the sense that it doesn't exist at all. The rope is really there. But our perception of it as a collection of separate, independent objects is false. There was never actually a snake. When the light of clear awareness shines, you realize that everything you thought was separate was actually just different appearances of the same underlying reality. This insight had revolutionary implications. If everything is essentially one consciousness appearing as many, then the divisions between self and other, between sacred and mundane, between spiritual and material, are all constructions of Maya. Shankara spent his short life, he died at age 32, traveling across India, debating with other philosophers and establishing monasteries where this understanding could be preserved and transmitted. But he wasn't just teaching an abstract philosophy. He was pointing people toward a direct recognition of their true nature. Because here's what Shankara understood that most people miss. Maya isn't just a philosophical concept to be understood intellectually. It's something to be seen through, transcended, recognized for what it is. And when that recognition happens, it's not that the world disappears. It's that you realize you were never separate from it in the first place. But how does this recognition actually happen? And what would your life look like if you could see through Maya's veil? To understand this, we need to look at some of the most remarkable accounts of people who have had this recognition. Throughout history, there have been individuals who, through various means, sometimes meditation, sometimes spontaneous insight, sometimes even through trauma or extreme circumstances, have suddenly seen through the illusion of separation. Take the case of Ramana Maharshi, a sage who lived in South India in the early 20th century. When he was just 16 years old, he was sitting in his family home when he was suddenly overwhelmed by an intense fear of death. But instead of running from this fear, something made him investigate it directly. He lay down and imagined his body dying. He watched his breath stop, felt his limbs grow cold, observed his thoughts disappearing. But throughout this entire process, there was something that remained, a clear, aware presence that was witnessing even the death of the body and mind. In that moment, he realized that what he truly was, this witnessing awareness, couldn't be touched by death because it was never born. The person he thought he was, Venkataraman, the 16-year-old boy, was just an appearance in this deathless awareness, like a character in a dream. This recognition was so complete and transformative that he left his family that very day and spent the rest of his life helping others recognize their true nature. What's remarkable about Ramana's story is that his realization wasn't the result of years of spiritual practice or study. It was a spontaneous seeing through of Maya's veil. But Ramana's case isn't unique. Throughout history, people from all cultures and backgrounds have had similar recognitions. In 13th century Germany, a Christian mystic named Meister Eckhart described realizing that God's ground and the soul's ground are one ground. In 13th century Persia, the Sufi poet Rumi wrote about the moment when he realized, "You are not just the drop in the ocean, but the ocean in the drop." What all these accounts have in common is a sudden recognition that the sense of being a separate self is a kind of optical illusion of consciousness. It's not that the individual person disappears. It's that you realize the person was never separate from the totality in the first place. But here's what's fascinating. This recognition doesn't make ordinary life meaningless or unreal. If anything, it makes it more vivid, more immediate, more alive. When you're no longer defending the boundaries of a separate self, there's an incredible freedom and spontaneity that becomes available. Imagine you're an actor who has become so identified with a role that you've forgotten you're acting. You're completely caught up in the character's dramas, fears, and desires. Then suddenly you remember, oh, I'm an actor. This is just a role I'm playing. Does this realization make the play meaningless? Not at all. If anything, it allows you to play the role more fully, more creatively, because you're no longer afraid of what might happen to the character. This is what life becomes like when Maya is recognized for what it is. You can still play your role as a person. You still have preferences, relationships, responsibilities. But there's a lightness, a playfulness, a freedom that wasn't there before, because you're no longer trapped in the role. And this brings us to one of the most practical aspects of understanding Maya: how it affects your daily experience of stress, anxiety, and suffering. Think about the last time you were really stressed or anxious. Maybe it was about work, relationships, money, health, or the future. Now, if you examine that stress carefully, you'll notice something interesting. The stress wasn't really about the external situation. It was about what that situation meant for you, for your image of yourself, for your story about who you are and what you need to be happy or secure. For example, if you're stressed about work, it's usually not just about the tasks themselves. It's about what your performance says about your competence, your worth, your future prospects. If you're anxious about a relationship, it's often not just about the other person. It's about what their behavior means about your lovability, your security, your story about how relationships should work. All of this stress and anxiety is generated by Maya, by the conviction that you are a separate person who can be threatened, diminished, or improved by external circumstances. But what if you recognized that this separate person is itself just an appearance in awareness, like a character in a dream? This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. You still engage fully with life, make decisions, take action. But there's a fundamental shift in the source of your motivation. Instead of acting from fear, need, or the compulsion to maintain and improve a separate self. You act from love, from spontaneous creativity, from what serves the whole. Let me share with you a story that illustrates this beautifully. There was a Japanese Zen master named Hakuin who lived in the 18th century. One day, a young unmarried woman in his village became pregnant. When her angry parents demanded to know who the father was, she panicked and said it was Hakuin, though this was completely false. The parents marched to Hakuin's temple and accused him furiously. His only response was, "Is that so?" When the child was born, they brought the baby to him and said he must take care of it. Again, his only response was, "Is that so?" And he cared for the child with great tenderness. A year later, the young woman couldn't bear the guilt anymore and confessed that Hakuin was not the father. The real father was a young man in the village. The parents were mortified. They rushed to Hakuin to apologize and ask for the child back. His only response was, "Is that so?" And he handed the child back without any trace of resentment or attachment. This story shows what life looks like when Maya is seen through. Hakuin didn't defend himself because he wasn't identified with the reputation of Hakuin, the respected Zen master. He didn't resent the false accusation because he wasn't attached to being seen as innocent. He didn't cling to the child because he wasn't trying to fill some personal need through the relationship. He simply responded to each moment with complete presence and appropriate action, free from the drama that the separate self creates around every situation. But here's what's important to understand. Hakuin didn't achieve this freedom by suppressing his personality or becoming emotionally numb. If you study accounts of people who have seen through Maya, you'll find they're often more vibrant, more expressive, more fully human than ordinary people. It's just that their expressions come from freedom rather than compulsion, from love rather than need. This brings us to one of the most misunderstood aspects of Maya, the relationship between this understanding and living in the world. Many people think that if everything is Maya, if the separate self is an illusion, then nothing matters. Why work? Why care about relationships? Why try to improve anything? This is actually a sign that Maya is still operating, just in a more subtle way. The idea that nothing matters is still coming from the perspective of a separate self, a self that now feels disillusioned or nihilistic. True seeing through of Maya doesn't lead to nihilism. It leads to what we might call divine ordinariness, a complete embracing of life just as it is, while being free from attachment to any particular outcome. Consider the example of Nisargadatta Maharaja, a 20th century sage who sold cigarettes in a small shop in Mumbai. After his recognition of his true nature, he didn't become a renunciate or retreat from the world. He continued selling cigarettes, caring for his family, dealing with customers. But those who met him could sense that he was living from a completely different dimension of being. When people asked him how he could continue with such mundane activities after realizing the ultimate truth, he would say, "I am not the doer. Actions happen, but there is no one doing them. Life lives itself." This points to perhaps the most profound aspect of Maya, the illusion of personal doership. We live with the constant feeling that I am the one making decisions, taking actions, having experiences. But when Maya is seen through, it becomes clear that life is living itself through what appears to be individual people. Think about this for a moment. Did you decide to be born? Did you choose your parents, your genetic makeup, the culture you were born into? Did you decide what preferences and talents you would have? Did you choose what thoughts would arise in your mind right now as you're hearing these words? If you look honestly, you'll find that the things you consider most fundamentally yours, your thoughts, your preferences, your reactions, are arising spontaneously without any central controller. The sense that you are in charge of your life is perhaps the most persistent aspect of Maya. But again, recognizing this doesn't lead to fatalism or passivity. When the illusion of personal doership is seen through, there's actually more energy available for action. because you're no longer wasting energy maintaining the story of being a separate doer. Actions happen more spontaneously, more appropriately, more creatively, because they're arising from the intelligence of the whole rather than from the limited perspective of a separate part. This understanding has profound implications for how we approach personal development, spirituality, and the search for happiness and fulfillment. Most self-help and spiritual approaches are based on the assumption that there's a person who needs to be improved, fixed, or enlightened. But from the perspective of Maya, this assumption is backwards. There is no person separate from the totality who could be improved. What we call personal development is actually the natural unfolding of life expressing itself through what appears to be individual forms. This doesn't mean you stop growing, learning, or engaging with practices that support well-being. But there's a fundamental shift in understanding. Instead of trying to improve yourself, you recognize that you are the process of life unfolding. You're not trying to get somewhere or become someone different. You're simply allowing life to live itself more fully through this apparent form. And this brings us to perhaps the most beautiful aspect of understanding Maya. It reveals that what you've been searching for your entire life, happiness, love, peace, fulfillment, was never actually missing. These aren't states you need to achieve or maintain. They're the very nature of the awareness that you are. Think about deep sleep. In deep sleep, there are no problems, no worries, no sense of lacking anything. There's just pure, peaceful being. You might say, but I'm not aware of anything in deep sleep. But something must be there to know that you slept peacefully. Otherwise, you couldn't report on the quality of your sleep when you wake up. That peaceful awareness that's present in deep sleep is the same awareness that's here right now, reading these words. It's the same awareness that was present when you were 5 years old, and when you'll be 90 years old if you live that long. It's the constant backdrop against which all experiences arise and pass away. Maya is what makes this ever-present peace and fulfillment seem hidden or absent. It's like clouds covering the sun. The sun is always shining, but the clouds make it seem like the sun has disappeared. Most spiritual seeking is an attempt to dispel these clouds, to clear away the obstacles to peace and happiness. But here's the profound recognition. You are the sun. The clouds are just temporary appearances. You don't need to get rid of the clouds to be the sun. You need to recognize that you are never anything but the sun, whether clouds are present or not. This recognition can happen in an instant, or it can unfold gradually over years. There's no formula, no guaranteed method, because what's being recognized was never actually hidden. It's more like suddenly noticing that you've been breathing all along. It's not an achievement. It's a recognition of what's already and always present. But there are certain approaches that can support this recognition. Throughout history, different traditions have developed practices designed to weaken Maya's hold on consciousness. Meditation is probably the most well-known approach. But meditation, properly understood, isn't about achieving special states or getting rid of thoughts. It's about recognizing the awareness in which all states and thoughts appear. When you sit quietly and simply notice what's already here, the sounds, the sensations, the thoughts, you're not trying to change anything. You're just becoming familiar with the aware presence that's always already aware of everything. Over time, this familiarity can lead to the recognition that you are this aware presence, not the thoughts and sensations that appear within it. This shifts your identity from the changing contents of awareness to awareness itself. Self-inquiry is another powerful approach, particularly as taught by Ramana Maharshi. This involves repeatedly asking the question, who am I? Not as an intellectual exercise, but as a direct investigation into the nature of your experience. When you ask, who am I? You might first answer, I am a person with this name, this job, this history. But then you can inquire further. Who is aware of being this person? You might then say, I am the thinker of thoughts. But again, who is aware of thoughts? Eventually, this inquiry leads you to the pure I am, the simple sense of existing and being aware, prior to any identification with particular experiences or attributes. But perhaps the most direct approach is what some traditions call direct pointing, or immediate recognition. This involves simply noticing what's here right now, before you label it or interpret it. Right now, there's an aware presence reading these words. This presence doesn't need to be created or achieved. It's already here. It's not located in your head or your body. It's the open space in which the experience of having a head and body appears. It's not personal. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's the same aware presence that looks out through every pair of eyes, listens through every pair of ears. This aware presence is what you truly are. Everything else, your thoughts, emotions, sensations, perceptions, the entire world of experience, are temporary appearances within this presence, like waves on the ocean or clouds in the sky. Maya is the mechanism by which this one awareness appears to become many separate things, separate people, separate objects, separate experiences. But just as all the waves are made of the same water, all apparently separate things are made of the same awareness. When this is clearly recognized, it doesn't make the waves less beautiful or meaningful. If anything, it makes them more wondrous, because you realize they're all expressions of the same infinite creativity. This understanding has practical implications for every area of life. In relationships, when you recognize that the same awareness looks out through your partner's eyes as looks out through yours, love becomes effortless. You're not trying to get something from someone else. You're recognizing yourself in another form. In work and creativity, when you realize that you're not a separate person trying to achieve something, but rather life expressing itself through this particular form, work becomes play. There's still effort, but it's effortless effort, like a river flowing toward the ocean. In dealing with difficult emotions, when you recognize that you are the awareness in which emotions appear, rather than someone who has emotions, there's immediate space and freedom. The emotions can be felt fully without creating suffering, because you're not identified with them. But perhaps most importantly, when Maya is seen through, the search for happiness and fulfillment comes to an end. Not because you become happy and fulfilled, but because you recognize that you are happiness and fulfillment itself. What you were seeking was never absent. It was the very seeker. This doesn't mean you become emotionally flat or lose interest in life. If anything, life becomes more vivid, more immediate, more alive. But there's no longer the constant background anxiety of trying to get somewhere or become someone different. There's a beautiful story from the Zen tradition that captures this perfectly. A monk approached his master and said, "Master, I've been practicing meditation for 20 years, seeking enlightenment. When will I finally achieve it?" The master replied, "Enlightenment? You've been sitting on it the whole time." The monk looked confused. "Then why do I still feel unenlightened?" The monk looked confused. "Then why do I still feel unenlightened?" The master smiled. "Because you keep getting up." This story points to the ultimate joke of Maya. What you're seeking is what you already are. The very seeking is what makes it seem absent. It's like looking for your glasses while you're wearing them. But there's great compassion in understanding Maya this way. It means that everyone is already whole, already perfect, already home. The apparent journey of seeking and finding is just the play of consciousness exploring itself through countless forms and experiences. From this perspective, even confusion, suffering, and the sense of separation serve a purpose. They're like the darkness in a movie that makes the light more vivid, or the tension in music that makes the resolution more beautiful. The entire play of Maya, including the forgetting and remembering of our true nature, is the creative expression of consciousness itself. This understanding brings tremendous compassion for the human experience. Everyone who seems to be suffering, struggling, or seeking is actually the one awareness appearing to have forgotten itself. The person you might judge as ignorant or unconscious is the same awareness that you are, just playing a different role in the cosmic drama. And perhaps most remarkably, this understanding reveals that there are no mistakes in life. Every experience, no matter how painful or confusing, is exactly what was needed for consciousness to explore and express itself. From the absolute perspective, even Maya itself is perfect. It's the mechanism by which the infinite appears as the finite. The one appears as the many, the eternal appears as time. But here's what's important to understand. Recognizing Maya doesn't mean you have to withdraw from life or become detached. Some people misunderstand these teachings and use them to justify spiritual bypassing, avoiding emotional intimacy, personal responsibility, or engagement with the world's problems. True recognition of Maya actually leads to more engagement, not less. When you're no longer defending the boundaries of a separate self, there's more energy available for love, service, and creative expression. When you're not trying to protect or improve a personal identity, you can respond to life more authentically and spontaneously. The sage Nisargadatta Maharaja was once asked, "If I realize I am not the body-mind, why should I care what happens to it?" He replied, "You are attached to the I am, but I am not attached. I am not concerned with who I am. I am beyond the I am." This points to a subtle but crucial distinction. There's a difference between detachment that comes from wisdom and detachment that comes from fear or avoidance. True detachment isn't indifference. It's caring without attachment to outcomes, loving without possessiveness, acting without compulsion. When Maya is truly seen through, life becomes more intimate, not less. You're no longer separated from your experience by the filter of a separate self. You taste food more fully, feel emotions more completely, love more freely. But you're also not imprisoned by any of these experiences, because you know they're all temporary appearances in the permanent awareness that you are. This brings us to perhaps the most practical question. How do you actually live from this understanding in the modern world? How do you pay bills, maintain relationships, pursue goals, and deal with responsibilities while recognizing that the separate self, who seems to be doing all these things, is ultimately an appearance in consciousness? The answer is both simple and profound. You don't try to live from this understanding. Life lives itself. When Maya is seen through, it becomes clear that life was always living itself. You were never actually in control in the first place. The sense of being a separate doer was itself part of Maya's magic show. But this doesn't lead to passivity. If anything, it leads to more appropriate and effective action, because the actions are arising from the intelligence of the whole rather than the limited perspective of a part. It's like the difference between an orchestra where each musician is trying to stand out versus an orchestra where each musician is serving the music itself. In practical terms, this might look like trusting your intuition more, planning less compulsively, worrying less about outcomes, and responding more spontaneously to what life presents. There's still planning and goal setting and responsibility, but they arise naturally from the situation rather than from ego-driven ambition or fear. Relationships become more authentic because you're not trying to maintain an image or get something from the other person. Work becomes more creative because you're not limited by ideas about what you can or cannot do. Even mundane activities like cleaning or cooking become opportunities for presence and appreciation. But perhaps most importantly, there's a fundamental shift in what motivates action. Instead of acting from the compulsion to survive, succeed, or be happy as a separate person, actions arise from love. Love for life itself, for the creative expression of consciousness through form. This love isn't sentimental or personal. It's more like the love of an artist for their art, or a musician for music itself. It's the love of existence for its own creative expression. And this brings us to what might be the most beautiful aspect of understanding Maya. It reveals that existence itself is an act of love. The one consciousness appearing as the many, the infinite playing at being finite, the eternal expressing itself through time. This entire cosmic dance is motivated by nothing other than love. From this perspective, your life, with all its apparent struggles and triumphs, joys and sorrows, is a love letter that existence is writing to itself. Every experience is precious, not because it serves some personal agenda, but because it's part of the infinite creativity of consciousness, exploring and expressing itself. This understanding can bring tremendous peace and acceptance to whatever circumstances you find yourself in. Whether you're dealing with success or failure, health or sickness, love or loss, you can recognize it all as the play of consciousness, as perfect expressions of the one awareness appearing in countless forms. But this acceptance isn't passive resignation. It's more like the acceptance of an actor who fully embraces their role in a play, knowing that they're not limited by the character they're portraying. This allows for much more creative and authentic expression, because you're not trying to protect or maintain the character. You're simply allowing the role to be played through you. And this brings us to perhaps the ultimate paradox of Maya, the recognition that it was never actually an obstacle or a problem to be solved. Maya is the creative power of consciousness itself. Without Maya, there would be no world, no experience, no love, no beauty, no discovery, no growth. Maya isn't something to escape from. It's something to dance with. The goal isn't to see through Maya and then live in some blank, featureless state of pure awareness. The goal is to recognize Maya for what it is, and then enjoy the play of consciousness more fully. It's like watching a movie. You can enjoy the movie much more when you remember that you're watching a movie. The drama becomes more exciting because you're not afraid for your safety. The comedy becomes funnier because you're not taking it too seriously. The romance becomes more beautiful because you're not trying to possess the characters. Similarly, when you recognize Maya, life becomes more enjoyable, not less. You can play your role more fully because you're not afraid of what might happen to the character. You can love more deeply because you're not trying to possess anyone. You can create more freely because you're not attached to the results. This is why the ancient sages who discovered Maya weren't grim ascetics fleeing from the world. Many of them were poets, artists, lovers of beauty and life. They recognized that Maya, properly understood, is not the enemy of truth. It is truth expressing itself in form. Take the example of Kalidas, often called the Shakespeare of Sanskrit literature, who lived around the 4th century CE. His poetry is filled with the most exquisite descriptions of nature, love, and human emotion. Yet underlying all his work is a deep understanding of Maya. He could write about the beauty of a flower or the pain of separation with such vividness precisely because he knew that both the beauty and the pain were waves in the ocean of consciousness. In one of his most famous works, he writes about a cloud carrying a message from a separated lover. On one level, it's a beautiful romantic poem. On another level, it's a metaphor for how consciousness carries messages to itself through all the forms of the world. The lover, the beloved, and the cloud are all the same awareness appearing in different forms. This is the ultimate recognition that Maya points toward. There is only one thing appearing as everything. The person reading these words, the words themselves, the screen or device they're appearing on, the room you're sitting in, the entire universe, it's all one seamless, undivided awareness appearing as the play of experience. But let me address something that might be troubling you as you hear all this. You might be thinking, if everything is just Maya, if my problems and struggles aren't ultimately real, does that mean I should just ignore them? Does this make me passive or irresponsible? This is where a lot of spiritual teaching goes wrong. People hear about Maya and think it means they should detach from life, become indifferent to outcomes, or use these teachings to avoid dealing with practical responsibilities. But true understanding of Maya actually makes you more responsible, not less. When you recognize that there's no separate self to protect or aggrandize, you can respond to situations more clearly and appropriately. You're not filtering everything through the lens of, how does this affect me? Instead, you can ask, what does this situation actually call for? Let me give you a powerful example. There's a story about the great 20th century sage Ramana Maharshi during the time when his ashram was being harassed by local authorities. Some of his devotees wanted to fight back legally. Others wanted to move the ashram elsewhere. Everyone was asking Ramana what they should do. His response was brilliant. He said, "The body has a disease, so you take medicine. The ashram has a problem, so you take appropriate action. But you don't become the disease, and you don't become the problem." He fully supported taking practical action while maintaining perfect equanimity about the outcome. This is what true understanding of Maya looks like in action. You engage fully with whatever life presents, but you're not emotionally hijacked by it. You care deeply about outcomes without being attached to them. You take responsibility without taking everything personally. And this brings us to something fascinating about Maya that most people miss. It operates differently at different levels of understanding. When you first learn about Maya, you might think it's all or nothing. Either everything is real or everything is illusion. But as understanding deepens, you realize that Maya has layers, like a sophisticated piece of software with multiple levels of operation. At the most basic level, Maya creates the illusion of physical objects existing independently in space and time. Your scientific education has probably already begun to dissolve this level. You know that what appears to be solid matter is mostly empty space, that time and space are relative, that the boundary between observer and observed is not as clear as it seems. At a deeper level, Maya creates the illusion of psychological separation, the feeling that your thoughts and emotions belong to you personally, that your consciousness is somehow separate from the consciousness of others. This is the level where most spiritual work happens, gradually recognizing that consciousness is shared, not personal. At the deepest level, Maya creates the very framework of experience itself, the apparent division between awareness and what it's aware of, between the knower and the known. This is the most subtle level, and recognizing it is what's traditionally called enlightenment or self-realization. But here's what's beautiful. You don't have to understand Maya completely at all levels to benefit from this knowledge. Even recognizing it at the first level, seeing through the solid appearance of the material world, can bring tremendous freedom and peace. When you realize that your body is not a solid, separate object, but a pattern of energy arising in consciousness, you worry less about its inevitable changes and eventual death. When you recognize that your thoughts are not solid entities, but temporary appearances in awareness, you're less likely to be overwhelmed by anxiety or depression. And when you begin to see through the illusion of psychological separation, relationships become much easier. You're less defensive, less needy, less likely to take things personally. You can love more freely because you're not trying to get something from others to complete yourself. This is why understanding Maya is so practical. It's not abstract philosophy. It's the most practical knowledge possible because it addresses the root cause of all psychological suffering. The belief that you are a separate, vulnerable entity in a potentially hostile universe. But let me tell you about one of the most profound applications of understanding Maya, how it transforms your relationship with death. Most human anxiety, when you trace it to its root, is ultimately about death, the fear that this separate self that you think you are will one day cease to exist. When Maya is seen through, death is revealed to be another illusion, not because the body doesn't die, it certainly does, but because what you truly are was never born and therefore cannot die. The awareness that's reading these words right now is the same awareness that was present when you were 5 years old. Your body has completely changed. Your thoughts and personality have evolved. Your circumstances are totally different, but that basic awareness remains unchanged. This awareness doesn't depend on the body or brain for its existence any more than the space in a room depends on the walls. When the walls are torn down, the space doesn't disappear. It simply merges back with the infinite space that was always there. I once heard a beautiful analogy for this. Imagine a wave on the ocean becoming conscious of itself as a separate entity. The wave might think, I am this particular formation of water, and when I crash on the shore, I will die and cease to exist. But if the wave could recognize its true nature, it would realize, I am not this temporary formation. I am the ocean itself, appearing as a wave. When this wave form dissolves, I don't disappear. I return to my true nature as the ocean. Understanding Maya reveals that you are not the wave of individual experience. You are the ocean of consciousness itself, temporarily appearing in this particular form. When this form dissolves, what you truly are doesn't disappear. It simply returns to its true nature as unlimited awareness. This understanding can bring tremendous peace to the process of dying, both for yourself and for loved ones who are facing death. Death is revealed to be not an ending, but a transition, like taking off a costume after playing a role in a play. But Maya's influence goes far beyond individual psychology. It shapes entire civilizations, cultures, and historical epics. Understanding Maya can help us see through many of the collective illusions that create suffering on a mass scale. Consider the illusion of nationalism, the belief that imaginary lines drawn on maps create fundamental divisions between human beings. People will kill and die for these lines, convinced that they represent something real and important. But from the perspective of Maya, national boundaries are just mental constructs, no more real than the boundaries between clouds in the sky. This doesn't mean we should ignore practical considerations about governance, culture, and social organization. But it does mean we can hold these things more lightly, recognizing them as useful conventions rather than ultimate truths worth dying for. Similarly, Maya operates in economic systems, creating the illusion that paper money has intrinsic value, that corporations are real entities separate from the people who comprise them, that economic growth can continue indefinitely on a finite planet. These are all examples of Maya at the collective level, shared beliefs that create apparent realities. Understanding Maya at this level can help us navigate these systems more skillfully while not being trapped by them. We can participate in economic life without being enslaved by it. We can appreciate cultural traditions without being rigid about them. We can work for positive change without being attached to specific outcomes. But perhaps the most profound application of understanding Maya is in the realm of meaning and purpose. Most people struggle with questions like, what's the meaning of life? Or, what's my purpose? These questions assume that meaning and purpose are things to be found or discovered, like hidden treasures. But when Maya is understood, these questions are revealed to be based on a false premise. Life doesn't have a meaning. Life is meaning. You don't have a purpose. You are purpose. The very fact that consciousness is aware, that existence exists, that love is possible, this is inherently meaningful and purposeful. The search for meaning is like asking, what's the purpose of music? Music doesn't exist to serve some external purpose. Music is purpose expressing itself as sound. Similarly, life doesn't exist to serve some cosmic agenda. Life is the cosmos expressing its inherent creativity and joy. When this is recognized, the desperate search for meaning comes to an end. Not because life becomes meaningless, but because you realize that existence itself is so inherently meaningful that no additional meaning is needed. Every moment, every experience, every breath is already completely purposeful, simply by virtue of being. This understanding can be tremendously liberating for people who have been struggling with depression, anxiety, or a sense of meaninglessness. These conditions often arise from the belief that life should be different than it is, that you should be someone other than who you are, that some external achievement or experience is needed to make existence worthwhile. But Maya reveals that this sense of lacking or needing something more is itself an illusion. What you're seeking, peace, love, fulfillment, meaning, is not absent. It's the very nature of the awareness that's seeking it. It's like being thirsty while standing in a crystal clear river. The water is right there, but you're looking everywhere except where you are. This brings us to one of the most beautiful aspects of Maya. It's self-liberating. The very investigation of Maya, the very questioning of your assumptions about reality, begins to dissolve Maya's hold on consciousness. It's like a dream that begins to dissolve the moment you start questioning whether you're dreaming. You don't need special techniques or years of practice to begin seeing through Maya. You just need to start questioning your most basic assumptions about reality. Question whether your thoughts are really yours. Question whether the boundaries between inside and outside, self and other, are as solid as they seem. Question whether you are really the character in the story of your life, or whether you might be the author, or even the page on which the story is written. This questioning doesn't need to be obsessive or analytical. It's more like a gentle curiosity, a playful investigation. Maya is maintained by belief, by unconscious assumptions. Simply bringing these assumptions into the light of awareness begins to dissolve their power. And as Maya's hold begins to loosen, you'll notice that life becomes lighter, more spontaneous, more joyful. There's less resistance to what is, less grasping for what might be, less regret about what's. There's a natural flow, an effortless engagement with whatever arises. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. If anything, you become more passionate, more creative, more engaged. But the passion comes from joy rather than need. The creativity comes from inspiration rather than compulsion. The engagement comes from love rather than fear. Let me share with you one final story that captures the essence of what we've been exploring. There was once a master craftsman who spent years carving an incredibly intricate and beautiful statue. When it was finished, people came from far and wide to admire it. They praised the craftsman's skill, the statue's beauty, the perfection of every detail. But the craftsman himself seemed strangely detached from all the praise. When asked why he wasn't more proud of his masterpiece, he smiled and said, "I didn't create this statue. I simply removed everything that wasn't the statue. The statue was always there, hidden in the stone. I just revealed what was already present." This is exactly what happens when Maya is seen through. You don't become enlightened. You don't achieve some special state. You don't transform into someone different. You simply remove everything that isn't your true nature. You chip away the false beliefs, the limiting identities, the unconscious assumptions, and what remains is what was always there. Pure, aware, loving consciousness. And just as the statue was always perfect within the stone, your true nature is already perfect, already whole, already free. Maya is like the excess stone that needs to be chipped away. But unlike physical carving, this process doesn't require force or effort. It requires recognition, understanding, and a gentle letting go of what was never true in the first place. The beautiful thing is that this process is happening naturally, all the time. Life itself is constantly showing you what you are and what you are not. Every experience of suffering is Maya revealing its own unreality. Every moment of peace is your true nature shining through. Every act of love is consciousness recognizing itself in another form. You don't have to wait for some future moment of realization. You don't have to achieve some special state or complete some spiritual program. Right now, in this very moment, the truth of what you are is completely present and available. Maya is not an obstacle to this recognition. It is this recognition appearing as the process of seeking and finding. So as we come to the end of this exploration, I want to leave you with this. You are not a person who has awareness. You are awareness appearing as a person. You are not someone who has experiences. You are the experiencing itself. You are not living in the world. You are the consciousness in which the world appears. This is not a belief to adopt or a concept to understand. This is the most immediate, intimate, obvious fact of your existence. It's closer to you than your own breath, more fundamental than your own heartbeat. It's what you are, what you've always been, what you could never stop being, even if you tried. Maya is the cosmic game of hide and seek that consciousness plays with itself. And the most beautiful moment in this game is not when the seeking ends, but when you realize that the seeker and the sought were never two different things. You are what you've been looking for, appearing as the one who is looking. If this exploration has touched something in you, don't just let it remain as an interesting idea. Take a moment right now to notice the awareness that noticed these words. That's who you really are. Subscribe for more deep dives into the nature of reality, because this conversation is just the beginning of remembering what you never actually forgot. If this exploration has touched something in you, don't just let it remain as an interesting idea. Take a moment right now to notice the awareness that noticed these words. That's who you really are. Subscribe for more deep dives into the nature of reality, because this conversation is just the beginning of remembering what you never actually forgot.